Hello, and welcome to Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. I'm Christina Caro, clinical psychologist, and my partner, executive leadership and self-trust coach Karen Linsky, is traveling for work this week. So I'm flying solo again, folks. So thanks for hanging in there with me. To go over really quickly where we are in this series of understanding cognitive processing diversity, we have been introducing the basic concepts of Carl Jung's cognitive processing functions as discussed in his 1923 book, Psychological Types. And for those of you who've never heard of Carl Jung, he was a Swiss psychoanalyst and psychiatrist and a contemporary of Sigmund Freud. But Jung had a much more holistic concept of the human psyche. My therapist is a Jungian analyst, and I find that Jung's theory of psychological type can really help us understand each other and our differences in ways that are extremely meaningful. So our goal in this series has been to help people appreciate the importance of neurodiversity, and in this case, cognitive processing diversity. So how we gather information specifically, and then how we organize that information and make decisions about it. Because these factors influence many aspects of our personality. Now, it's really important to understand that we are not talking about labeling, but we do have preferences that is very similar to handedness. It's in the hardwiring. Even though I could sign my name with my non-dominant hand if I had to, I am born with a preference to use my right hand. These cognitive processing preferences of how we gather data, so the perceiving, what Jung called perceiving cognitive preferences, and our decision-making or judging cognitive preferences are very similar in that we are born with a preference in one particular way, although during the lifespan, because the brain continues to grow, the non-dominant functions start to become more and more available to us. And we can always cultivate them. We can actually really decide to learn about these functions and say, let me practice this. For example, we talked about extroverted sensing in our first episode, which is using the 5 senses in the here and now. And we all use it to some extent, but some of us, like myself, only land briefly. Like, I'm not the most observant person in the world. But if I work on it, and I work on being present, then I can strengthen that function. And anyone who's done mindfulness meditation, you are actually engaging and developing your extroverted sensing function when you're paying attention to your breath in the present moment, or you're listening and doing a sound mindfulness practice, or you're doing a sensation mindfulness practice. Those are all practices to cultivate extroverted sensing. So we are going over all of these function types, partly to educate people so they can start to learn about themselves, but also so that you can start understanding the people around you, being more curious, and suspending judgment. There was a great book called I'm Not Crazy, I'm Just Not You. And it's about this way that we have a tendency to assume everybody thinks the way we do and processes the way we do. And when we see it done differently, we're like, what's wrong with you? Why are you thinking that way? And there's an automatic judgment. So this series is to help people understand that there are these differences, that we are a very diverse set of brains, and that we can start to understand each other better and have a lot less negative judgment. Now, before we dive in, I'm going to remind you to please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and hit the notification button, which is the little bell, so you know when new episodes are posted. This data, when you're hitting like and when you're sharing, and particularly when you're engaging in the comments, and I heard recently that apparently like 7 is a magic number in terms of the number of words that you use in the comment is what YouTube sees as meaningful engagement. And the more meaningful engagement that we have, the more YouTube will say, oh, this is useful information. We should put it in front of more people. So this is a free resource. We don't have a paywall. This is a resource that we are building and putting together for me because there is a shortage of mental health care providers. And I wanted to create a library of resources for people who maybe haven't been able to find a therapist or they're on a wait list someplace, so that they can at least start doing some of the foundational work of understanding themselves and growing. So your participation in building this community by putting in a comment that's more than 7 words or hitting that like button will really help us get this out to more people. And if you're on the podcast listening to us, if you have an opportunity, once you're not driving, if you look at the show notes, there's a button that says text us, and that will send us a message directly to our Gmail account, which is simplyhuman.connect@gmail.com. So let us go ahead and dive in. Now, today we're talking about the cognitive judging function called extroverted feeling, or feeling that is outward oriented, feeling in the extroverted attitude meaning direction. This is one of what Jung called a rational function because you are actually analyzing, organizing, and acting on raw data. The perceiving functions he called irrational functions because it's just gathering. You aren't always super actively doing it. It's just what you attend to naturally. But when you go into judging, you are applying energy, you are analyzing, organizing, and acting on it. Now, key characteristics of this type is that people and the needs of others are a primary decision criteria. There is a desire for external harmony and a prioritization of social values and norms. And what do I mean by primary decision criteria? Is that each of the judging functions, so there's extroverted thinking and introverted thinking, which we just did the 2 episodes on, and now we're doing extroverted feeling and introverted feeling. Each of those tends to rely on preferred sets of criteria when they're making their decisions. So we talked about extroverted thinking, it's objective criteria, rules, regulations, standard operating procedures, logical, fair rules that anybody could find because it's external. Introverted thinking is an internal framework, much like an algorithm, that there is an if this then logical consistency in the criteria. An extroverted feeling, it is this orientation towards the needs of others and the social norms, the cultural norms that guide communities of people. So this is an external oriented, objective processing style. So one of the key things to understand is because it's called the feeling function, people often get confused and assume that it means emotional decision making. And that is not the case. This is a rational function. Emotions are a completely different thing. You could be very heated and emotional and an extroverted thinking. You could be very emotional about a rule that's been broken. You could be very emotional as an introverted thinker, and you're getting into a debate with someone and it's really getting your emotions up because you're really passionate about the precision of it. So there's emotions there. So just because it's called feeling, and this is both introverted feeling and extroverted feeling, but mostly extroverted feeling, again, we are not talking about emotional decision making. We are talking about a value-based decision-making criteria and process that is focused on helping others and being of service. It drives the need for action in the face of unfairness because of this sensitivity to how others are affected. It tends to organize around the needs. So when it's organizing to take action, it is primarily focused on the needs of others. And it drives things like decisions, like these make really good gift givers seekers because they're always paying attention to that information about making decisions that benefits other people. Now, the prevalence of this type, it's actually when you add the 4 different types who have this. So there's 2 types based on the Myers-Briggs type instrument, which is a psychological instrument that was developed shortly after Jung's book was published, called the Myers-Briggs Personality Type Instrument, and it is an instrument that helps you identify what your dominant and auxiliary functions are. And to remind you once again, when we use the car metaphor, the dominant function is the driver of the car, auxiliary is your passenger co-pilot, and then your tertiary is the teenager in the back seat. Your 4th function or inferior is the toddler in the back seat. And then your other 4 functions are somewhere in the trunk of the car. You may never even open up the trunk to find them unless life circumstances forces you to discover what's back there. So of the 4 that have this, they equal 29.8% of the population. So given that there's 4 different decision-making or judging functions, if it was equally distributed, this would be more like, 25%, but you can see it's slightly more than a quarter of the population. So we have the 2 dominant types on the Myers-Briggs. You would have had a code of letters of ESFJ, which is 12%, or ENFJ, which is 2.5%. So ESFJ is dominant, extroverted feeling, and their co-pilot is that introverted sensing, which was the 2nd episode in the series. In the ENFJ, you have extroverted feeling is in the driver's seat and introverted intuition, that that I think 3% total of the population. Then the other 2 are having extroverted feeling as the auxiliary, ISFJ, so that's introverted sensing in the driver's seat with extroverted feeling in the passenger. That's 13.8%. And you have INFJ, which is that dominant driver, introverted intuition, and extroverted feeling is the co-pilot, 1.5% of the population. So to help you envision what this looks like, we are going to turn to our fictional examples. So let's start with the ENFJ, the extroverted feeler with the introverted intuition. And that is Wonder Woman, or Diana Prince from the DC Comics. And with Wonder Woman, she's got that introverted intuition, past, present, and future, time orientation. And it's these big concepts of, protecting humanity. So leadership through compassion. She has a strong sense of collective justice. And you see she's a problem solver, but it's very much about helping other people and harmony focus. And she uses charisma to inspire other people to be their best self. So let's move on. Actually, let's do ESFJ, which is that dominant extroverted feeling, but with the introverted sensing. And if you are a Harry Potter fan, you will remember Molly Weasley, the mom of the Weasley family. And you see she's that natural nurturer. She's always making sure everybody has their school books and they know where they're going. She's very warm, very supportive, also has a strong sense of caring. When we talked about SJs being that pillars of the community, she's always protecting her family. And you see her, even though the house looks like it's all a jumble, it's still, she has the clock that has where everybody is. It's very organized. And she's always making sure that the family has what they need. So now that you have these are wonderful archetypes to help you have an idea of what these preferences look like. So again, just to go over the core aspects of extroverted feeling, we have group, harmony, focus, and social values and norms being the most prominent of decision-making criteria. They have emotional attunement to others, so that empathy. Matter of fact, many can say like they're really affected by the emotional energy in the room. They're the ones who know right away like who's uncomfortable, who needs the temperature changed, who might be hungry. Oh, let me get that chair for you. How can I help you out? They're the neighbor who brings the casserole over because they know that someone in the family was sick and it would be helpful. They also do tend to drive their decision making by looking at like what is happening outside of them. It's an external validation seeking. This type is the most prone to external validation seeking, and that does become one of the weaknesses that we will go into a little bit later. How this differs, and I'll just touch on it briefly because next week we'll be going into introverted feeling. This is quite different from feeling in the introverted attitude because it is really focused externally. The criteria is based on those external norms, whereas introverted feeling is based on what I feel inside, my own personal values, what feels right to me, and not always being as attuned to those external norms or those external criteria. As a matter of fact, extroverted feeling types, of which I am, if you ask me, what do I need? You'll get a little bit of a deer in headlights look because introverted feeling is a like in the trunk of the car function for me. And I have to really work hard to like pause and like look inside and like, I'm not even sure what to do with that question. And, I don't know, but I can know before a person even knows themselves what they need. But knowing what I need, it's a introverted process. So it's slow. And then it's one that I'm not as familiar with. So I'm not always confident. Like, I think I would like this. I've worked on it over the years, so I'm better at it. But I can tell you when I was in my 20s and 30s, I had no clue what was going on internally. As an extroverted feeling type, that introverted feeling was so foreign to me. And we extroverted feeling types can have judgment towards introverted feeling because we tend to experience it in others as very selfish, very egocentric, because it's so centered on what's internal to the person. And we're just like, I don't even know what that is. Like, why aren't you thinking about others? So that is a judgment, extroverted feeling types, that you need to be aware of and need to challenge yourself on that. If you have someone in your life who might be an introverted feeler, stop for a moment and ask yourself, like, have I judged a lot of their decisions as selfish? So let's go back to the apple exercise real quick to all of us have an opportunity to experience this. So if you don't have your apple, you can pause the video, grab your apple. And then once you have it, the question to ask yourself, and you can keep the video paused, is how could the apple benefit the most people? Either you can go back to your memory and think about it if you're introverted sensing type, like what are some things from past experience that would guide you in what can I do with this apple, or how is this apple beneficial? Or if you're an introverted intuitive and you are thinking about the greater good for the apple, so the big picture greater good for the apple, how could the apple serve the greater good? So I'll give you a moment to do that on your own. Now, to go over generally what you should be seeing in case this is not your preference, what you hear a lot in groups will be, if you're an introverted sensei type, you would hear things like, oh, I could bake a pie, I could give it away, I could slice it up, and then I could share it with more people. And if you'll hear some of the intuitive types say something like, oh, I could plant the seeds and then I can grow an entire apple orchard, and then that would benefit even more people. Or, some people might say, oh, I could bake a pie, I could use it in a pie, or I could turn it into a Christmas ornament and give it as a gift, or I could just give it as a gift or use it at Halloween. So these are sorts of things that you could see the focus is how would other people benefit? Very different from how would you logically organize it, or how do you yourself feel about it? How could the apple benefit the most people? Then you're tapping into extroverted feeling. Now, to go over quickly over the gifts of extroverted feeling, we already mentioned there's a natural diplomacy because of this attunement to how other people are responding and how I might need to present things to be most palatable, or I might need to present things for a win-win solution. So there's a combination of diplomacy and the desire for harmony that makes these folks really good at negotiating and problem solving in a way when you have a team, say, or you're in your family, they are very good at problem solving in the way where they're trying to have as many people who are happy as possible. These folks, we have strong empathy, as I mentioned, because we can feel that external energy around us of people. If they've worked on it, they have developed emotional intelligence. Now, everyone can develop their emotional intelligence. Extroverted feeling types are kind of born on third base with this one. I mean, you still have to do some work to get all the way to home run, but you're born with a little bit ahead of everybody else with some natural gifts that makes developing emotional intelligence a lot easier. These folks are great at community building. They're, matter of fact, if they're the dominant type, so an ENFJ, ESFJ in the Myers-Briggs, they will spend a lot of energy gathering people, right? Because they get that energy from having community around them, having people and friends and family around them. So they'll put a lot of energy towards community building. And you'll see them in types of jobs where they are community building or participating in community, like teaching or nursing. They are very adaptable because they're good at picking up the social norms and figuring out how to fit in, and they lead through harmony. So they're the types of leaders who don't necessarily foster competition. They're the types of leaders who will foster collaboration. So they make very good leaders. It's just a different style of leadership. And they're also the most, especially the dominant, the ESFJ, ENFJ, you'll see the most outwardly loving and supportive people. The ISFJ and INFJ are also very loving, but they don't like the spotlight on them, so they do it in very quiet ways. Like if you're in a relationship with someone who's INFJ, ISFJ, if you stop to think about it and you think about how are your needs met by your partner or your boss who happens to be this type, you will notice that they are doing subtle things to make your life easier and never mentioning it. But it's still outwardly a really loving and supportive sort of way of being in the world because of those decisions being driven by attunement to others and creating harmony and care and concern in the external world. Now, the challenge is because of all this energy going outward towards taking care of others, we have a tendency to neglect our personal needs. And we are most likely to feel like a doormat because people get very used to the nurturing and the caregiving and they start to take it for granted. And so you will find that it's usually if someone feels like a doormat, that it's most likely this is probably it's either this or the introverted thinking will be their preference. They can over adapt to the expectations of others and forget to check in with themselves, with their own values. And if there is an incongruence with the expectation of others and what's in oneself, you will feel more stressed, and you may not even know why you're feeling stressed, but you are trying to adapt to the expectations of others. And maybe they are unrealistic expectations, but that decision-making drive is to do without stopping to reflect internally. So this can be a real challenge. Difficulty with personal boundaries and a proneness as a consequence to resentment. It is critical for extroverted feeling types to do boundary works. And I'm going to put the link in the show notes that links you to our episode on why your boundaries don't work and the Boundary Busters series, because that is your work. When your decision making is driven by the needs of others, it's very hard to say no. You will be in the habit of yes, 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 yes. You haven't done that introverted feeling to be like, what's really important to me? What feels good to me? And you don't know how to set those boundaries. So it's so important to cultivate boundaries because, like I said, this type is prone to nursing resentments, to feeling like I'm being taken for granted, to being a doormat and not having those boundaries. You can get a real martyr tendency. You can have resentments. As a matter of fact, what I tell my clients is if you find yourself feeling resentment, make friends with that emotion because it is your immediate feedback that you are not having a boundary. And extroverted feeling types out there, I want you to be really honest with yourself. If you are prone to resentment, this may be your preference, and it's about not having boundaries. You want to be loving in the world, you have to sustain your own energy. It is not just limitless, okay? Our batteries do run dry if we aren't taking care of ourselves. So, do check out those episodes if you find yourself in that situation. These types also are prone to conflict avoidance because they like harmony. They prefer things to be peaceful. And if you haven't cultivated what would be your third or fourth, which is that introverted thinking, analytical, that ability to ask why, then you may be stuck in conflict avoidance. So you would want to actually go and develop that third or fourth function to balance out that need for harmony, because conflict is a part of life. And if you are avoiding conflict, then you are self-abandoning some part of yourself. And that ultimately will lead to resentments or depression and anxiety. So it's really important to ask yourself these questions. Or if you have a partner who you see getting into resentment, you can be a supporter by encouraging them to have boundaries, encouraging them to not be afraid of conflict, to say what they're truly feeling, and reassure them that they're not going to hurt your feelings, that you truly want to hear what they have to say. You see, this is my second, so I am much more deeply familiar with this, so I can speak to it much more fully than I could some of the other ones, even though I've been working with this for over 25 years. The last thing is that they can be, as we said earlier, overly dependent on external validation. And in the first episodes of this podcast, we did a series of 4 on imposter syndrome. And one of the issues was this dependency on external validation. Extroverted feeling types are very prone to, did I get the gold star? Did I check all the boxes? That means I'm okay. If you're happy, I'm okay. That's a problem. If you're happy, I'm okay. Extroverted feeling types have to cultivate internal validation, some capacity for internal validation. If I'm okay, I'm okay. Because you cannot just indefinitely run on if you're okay, I'm okay. Because then you are completely dependent on the whims and the moods of the people around you. And then you are put into a situation of constantly trying to be, what do I need to do to make you feel better? Very prone to codependency. This function, extroverted feeling, most prone to codependency. So you become over functioning. You find yourself in relationships with someone who's under functioning, and then you're constantly trying to make them happy so you're okay. So these are some of the challenges that you really need to look out for in order to be at your best version of yourselves, where you're really coming from your strengths and you're not handicapped by your weaknesses. So in terms of practical applications in the work environment, these are the folks who are really great at team building and collaboration. They are natural born diplomats who can be good at conflict resolution if it's other people. If they're not personally involved with it, they actually are good because they're looking for a win-win. They do find them in jobs like HR, in management, leadership, teaching, because you're taking care of the needs of children, nursing, public service, armed services. Actually find a lot in the armed services because of that drive to serve their country. So you see a lot of ISFJs and ESFJs going into armed services. You'll find some even in first responders, even though that being in the now isn't necessarily always a strength, but you still get them because it's about being of service to the community. So really anything that philanthropic work, nonprofit work, even lawyers, an attorney, and they might be the public defenders. So there's really a whole bunch of different careers that this type is going to work really well at. In personal relationships, this is the type that is always working to make family occasions really special, who pays attention to when people's birthdays and special occasions are. And they do a lot of social networking, even if they are the introverts and it's secondary. With the introverts, you'll see that if the limited social battery that they have, they will prioritize using that energy to sustain and nurture their close relationships. And the ENFJ, ESFJ, their energy is in building community. So there's a lot, PTA and let's do the block party and all of that kind of stuff. And they're also the people who you find you tend to go to. Like they're the facto therapist in the family who's the really good listener who you tend to go to for that support. So to wrap up, extroverted feeling is a really important function in our society. It's the glue that holds society together. That's a really good way to think about it. They are the ones who are most going to champion fairness, well-being, sort of egalitarian endeavors, joyfulness, celebration, holding other people up. So you can see how in a society and a family, how important this function is. And if you have this type and you are facing some of the challenges, it's important to do some of that work around boundaries and learning about your own values to balance out that need for harmony. And if you have someone in your life who you see this type of manifestation, again, take that time. Ask, even though it's uncomfortable for them, don't assume just because they're giving that they don't have needs themselves. As a loving person in their life, take that time to check in. Don't just always call because you want support from them because they're so good at being supportive. Remember to make those calls just to say, I'm just calling to see how you're doing. How have you been? Is everything going well for you? Because that means a lot. I mean, they're not used to it, but it really does mean a lot to this part. So thank you all for listening. I hope this was helpful. And if you are this type, please look in the links below so that you can work on those boundaries and understand where your boundary busters. Also, we also have a series on conflict, like managing conflict better. So those are probably good episodes for you as well. And then don't forget, folks, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. If this was helpful to you, please put 7 or more words into the comments to help our YouTube gods get this out in front of more people. And then next week, we'll be going over the last function, introverted feeling. So I can't wait to see you all there. And Karen should be back. And don't forget to be curious. See you next time.